Katy Keiffer, and I'm the host of What Doesn't Kill You, Food Industry Insights on the Heritage Radio Network. My show is a mix of all kinds of topics because I have a kind of a magpie mind. I do politics, policy, new technical innovations. I love to cover issues around dairy, around the meat industry, labor in the food system, water quality, soil conservation, all that kind of stuff is grist to my mill.
Hi, my name is Jenna Liut, and I'm the host of Eating Matters, a podcast on Heritage Radio Network where I talk about food systems and policy and how it impacts all of us. First, a little bit more about me. I am a business development and marketing specialist with a lot of food industry experience in the startup, private, and public sectors. In addition to hosting Eating Matters, I've spent the past several years working at two different early-stage food startups, first for an online farmers market and grocery delivery service, and most recently at a company upcycling food waste into more sustainable versions of common products and ingredients. Part of what I want to do on the show is demonstrate how everyday actions of growing, processing, selling, and consuming food is political, how food is inherently political, and in my opinion, perhaps more so within the food industry than any other industry today.
Hi PASA attendees, I'm Lisa Held, host of the Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a freelance journalist. Currently, my main gig is as the senior policy reporter for Civil Eats, where I write about food and agriculture, often from a policy angle. And my stories are also published in many other publications like the Washington Post, the Guardian, Foodprint, all over. I'm also in the midst of launching a newsletter that is going to go deeper into my reporting on the food system. It's called Peeled. And if you're interested in signing up, you can head over to peeled.substack.com to check it out. So let me tell you about the Farm Report. It is one of Heritage Radio Network's longest running shows. It's been on for more than 10 years. I've been hosting it for about 2.5 of those. And my focus is really on talking about agriculture and the food system through a lens that's focused on related issues like environmental impact, equity, social justice, other things like that. So I like to tie in current events, what's happening in the world, and I talk to farmers primarily, but also researchers, authors, CEOs, advocates, elected officials, really anyone working in the food system, in food production in some way.
I also like to keep track of current events, so I'm always interested in somebody whose story has something to do with an event that is either just in the recent past or about to come up, but I don't do infomercials. So if you're trying to promote an event or something like that, that's a little harder for me to take as a guest. I interview a wide range of types of guests. Often it's journalists, just because I read their piece and then I call them up and say, hey, I really liked that piece. Can we talk more about it? But sometimes I'll just pull a name out of somebody's piece, and whether it's a university professor or a hydrologist or some sort of expert in whatever field it is that I'm reading about, and I will call them directly. So I certainly don't limit my guests to any particular type. I look for people in all walks of life to comment on what is happening in the food system and in agriculture in the United States and around the world. So the best advice I can give you is to try to be sure that your pitch has enough legs so that more than a small group of people are going to be interested in that. You want something that's gonna hook all kinds of people, whether they're involved in agriculture or policymaking or something else, or not. It doesn't, as long as I want it to be something that everybody's going to get involved in and learn something from, and also encourage them to be more curious and to seek more information either through me or through other sources.
Okay, so elements of a good pitch. Number one, why are you pitching this topic now? What's the urgency? Did a product just launch, startup just raise, policy or regulation that directly impacts your work pass? Why are we talking about this right now? Number two, tailor it. Why me? This doesn't have to be anything major. Perhaps it's just a sentence or a phrase, but you should demonstrate that you know the kind of content that I produce and the stories that I like to follow. For example, if you know a little bit about my background and you've listened to the show, you know that I love talking about food waste. Last season, I interviewed Turner Wyatt, who's the co-founder of the Upcycled Food Association, which focuses on supporting and growing an economy for companies working to valorize food waste. And just the other day, as kind of a follow-up to that initial episode, I interviewed Matriarch Foods, which is one of the founding members of the Upcycled Food Association. So this was a natural progression in terms of content. Number 3, similarly, isn't relevant to what I typically cover. And will my listeners want to learn about this? The thing that all of my guests have in common is that they're either working or reporting on food system reform at some level. And if they're on my show, probably at a lot of levels. Yes, I have a food podcast on a food radio station, but that doesn't mean that you should pitch your new cookie company to me just because they're really delicious, selling well, and happen to be naturally gluten-free, meaning you just use oats instead of flour. So this was a real-life example of something that wasn't a great fit for my show. Number 4, make it easy for me. Send potential story angles and discussion points. On behalf of every journalist and podcaster out there, I promise we appreciate the help thinking through compelling ways to tell your story that makes sense for the show. It might not end up being what we discuss on air, but it's definitely helpful to show the possibilities and get the ideas flowing. This basically also helps remove another barrier to getting your guests on the show.
So, in terms of pitches, I'm supposed to give you some advice. My first piece of advice would be, if you reach out to me and you don't hear back, follow up. I get a lot of pitches, and mostly they're from PR companies that are not related to what I do, or just sort of clog up my inbox. And I do want to hear from farmers, and I want to hear from you, and I will get back to you. Sometimes it can just take a minute, but I do read every single email. So if you haven't heard back from me, follow up. I will get back to you. And in terms of what to say and how to pitch your story, so what I'm looking for is a specific story angle, not just, hi, I'm Sarah, and I run a diversified organic vegetable farm. If that's you, I love that, and I'm so excited that you're doing that. But I need kind of a hook. I need something that sets up a narrative. So I need to know what's unique about you and what you're doing. It could be a big challenge you're encountering, you think other farmers are also up against and no one's talking about it. It could be a practice that you've discovered on the farm that transforms your production, and you think maybe other people don't know about this new way of doing things. Could be a way your community is supporting you or supporting local food and farms in a way that you haven't seen in other places. So I'm going to give you 2 examples to try to illustrate what I'm talking about. I had an episode in 2020 with an organization called Jones Valley Teaching Farm. And they came to me with a story about COVID, which obviously a lot of our stories in 2020 were about COVID. But they're an organization that has several urban farms in Birmingham, Alabama, that are set up specifically for education, for middle and high school students. And essentially they had to shut down all of their programming because kids weren't in school and couldn't be, congregating during COVID. But so they pivoted and they had their farmers continue to grow food and to sort of transform the farms that they had into focusing on intensive production rather than education, so that they could give out the food they were growing in their local communities that were hit really hard by the economic recession that was accompanied by COVID. So Jones Valley's model is great on its own, like this amazing organization that uses farming to enhance education. But there's a lot of organizations that do that. So if they had reached out to me and just said, hey, we're this organization, this is what we do, I don't know that it would have been enough for a show. But because they presented it as, here's a specific challenge, how we met it, how it affected the people in our community, and it was one of my favorite episodes of 2020. One other example for you. I had a farmer in Maryland, which is where I am based, on the show. Emma Jagos, she runs Moon Valley Farm, and I called the episode A Neighborhood Farm's Next Chapter. So Moon Valley is a super successful organic vegetable farm that does a really large CSA and sells to local restaurants. They've been around for a while, but she came on the show right when she had purchased her first tract of land, before she had been kind of growing in all of these borrowed plots all over the place. And this was this opportunity for her to really take the farm to the next level. And so we were able to talk about the history of how she got set up and what she faced along the way in terms of challenges, and then what was coming next in the future.
A few more things about the pitch itself. Be excited. If you're not excited and enthusiastic about the pitch, how am I supposed to be? So own it. And always establish the credibility of the guest you're pitching. Make them sound like a really big deal. And finally, if you're representing a film or a book, provide a link to it or a PDF and offer to send a hard copy. Similarly, with a product, ask where you can send it. And ask with the assumption that I will say yes. If you can get content or product into our hands, the likelihood of your guest being featured goes up dramatically. Okay, so after you've sent the pitch, a couple quick things. Number 6, follow up. Sometimes I suck at responding. I'm not proud, but I'm only human. So if you haven't heard from me after a week, follow up. You're not bugging me, you're just reminding. And honestly, it's such a helpful nudge. And if it's not a great fit at the time, please don't let that stop you from sending through more ideas in the future. Which leads me to my final point. Let's stay in touch. Develop a rapport with whoever you're pitching. I can tell you personally, if we've worked together in the past, there's a good chance we're going to work together again in the future because you have a sense of what I like to talk about and cover. A fair number of people who I've received pitches from in the past and covered, I've gone on to work with again.